Not too long ago, Russell Wilson was one of the most respected players in the NFL. But in less than a year, his reputation has been dragged through the dirt. It wouldn't be a far reach to say that Russ is the most despised and ridiculed player in the entire league. What happened? And are the criticisms justified, or will Wilson get the last laugh? Let's get right into it. Entering the 2012 NFL Draft, Wilson was a promising prospect. In his senior year at the University of Wisconsin, he proved that he had an overwhelming amount of talent as a dual-threat quarterback. However, since he was under 6 feet tall, there were plenty of questions about whether or not his talent would translate at the NFL level. Still, his charming smile and superior talent levels endeared him to those who tracked his development. Even scouts at the Combine seemed to have more of an affinity towards Wilson than a typical prospect. When the evaluator was taking his official measurements for his draft profile, he announced 5 feet 11 inches, which was followed by a round of applause by the scouts in attendance. Everyone was hoping for him. At the draft, Wilson was selected in the 3rd round by the Seattle Seahawks, a team that was certain to have a new starter at the position. After earning the job at training camp, Wilson was appointed the starting job over newly acquired Matt Flynn, who was signed to a significant contract in free agency. As a rookie, Wilson continued to embrace his role as underdog with stellar play. Fellow rookies Andrew Luck and Robert Griffin III were two of the most highly touted quarterback prospects to enter the league, but Wilson was able to fly under the radar and quietly put up a comparable season and lead the Seahawks to the 2nd round of the playoffs. At the time, Wilson wasn't considered the star of his team. He was considered a good fit due to the Seahawks' strong defense and running game. Wilson was proving he could toss the rock down the field, but also make enough plays with his feet to steal games. Meanwhile, Seahawks coach Pete Carroll was revolutionizing the NFL with his player-friendly approach to coaching. Traditionally, NFL coaches were hard-nosed and authoritative figures who trained their teams in military-type fashion. Carroll wasn't that way, though. He believed in creating a positive and inclusive atmosphere fueled by passion and trust. And Wilson, who was a religious, clean-cut, and well-spoken young man, was the perfect poster boy for what the Seahawks were trying to build. In his 2nd NFL season, Wilson guided the Seahawks to a 13-3 record and their first ever Super Bowl championship. Even though Wilson put up exceptional numbers and was named a Pro Bowler, more credit went to the Seahawks' defense and run game. The Seahawks' defense, known as the Legion of Boom, was historically good and was led by players such as Richard Sherman, Earl Thomas, Bobby Wagner, Michael Bennett, and Kim Chancellor. The running game was led by Marshawn Lynch as well. With so many big-time personalities in various positions, Wilson wasn't recognized as the true leader of the team. The next season, the Seahawks were hungry to repeat, and Wilson was eager to prove that he was more than just a game manager for the Seahawks. After winning his first Super Bowl, Wilson's ego began to inflate, and he was beginning to resent the fact that he was overlooked as a quarterback because the rest of his team was so dominant. Even though Wilson was able to pretend that he was a team-first guy, there are some reports to say that he was beginning to push boundaries and open his mouth in ways he didn't during his initial seasons in the league. And since the quarterback position tends to have more longevity and marketability than other positions, ownership had incentives to favor Wilson and his stardom more than the other players on the roster. Richard Sherman was publicly criticized for his brash attitude, and Marshawn Lynch was being portrayed as a villain by the media because he wasn't interested in participating in post-game interviews. In contrast, Russell Wilson was eager to put on a big smile, answer questions, and soak up as much credit as possible for his team's success. The stark differences in attitude caused some friction between Wilson and some of his peers. Eventually, the Seahawks made it all the way to the Super Bowl, where they were only 1 yard away from back-to-back glory. However, in a moment that's now recognized as one of the biggest blunders in NFL history, the Seahawks opted to pass the ball on 1st and goal at the 1 yard line. The decision not to hand the ball to Marshawn Lynch, the best power back, has been widely criticized. Instead, the play call was for Wilson to throw the ball in for a Super Bowl winning score. However, the stink nugget hit the fan when Wilson threw an interception to Malcolm Butler, and the Pats won the Super Bowl instead. Many people close to the organization claim that the motivation behind the play call was a favoritism toward Wilson, who the Seahawks wanted to highlight as a hero. The miss caused friction, sadness, and anger to the Seahawks, and the group never recovered. The Seahawks continued to compete at a high level but never returned to the Super Bowl. Russell Wilson did become the team's poster and earned the badge of team leader, while their historically great defense dispersed. But even with Wilson being recognized as a top quarterback in the league, he still wanted more. On the outside, Wilson maintained his pristine image. But to those within the organization and those that had moved on, they were sick of him. Wilson began clashing with his head coach Pete Carroll about how the offense should be operated. He would make direct requests to upper management regarding roster decisions that he believed the team should consider, and when his ideas were rejected, he would pout and complain. His ego inflated to the point where he felt that he was above the Seahawks and that the rest of the organization should answer to him. Some reports claim that Wilson went to ownership and requested that they fire both general manager John Schneider, who drafted him, as well as coach Pete Carroll, who he won a Super Bowl with. Wilson, however, denies those claims. What isn't denied is that after his 10th season in Seattle, Russell Wilson requested to get traded. He wanted to join an organization that gave him more authority over roster decisions and offensive play calling. So the Denver Broncos traded a slew of players and draft picks for him and also signed him to a massive 8-year, $245 million contract. The Seahawks handled the whole situation with class. Well, at least they did at the beginning. Russell Wilson's first order of business was to have an executive office space built for him at Mile High Stadium next to the coaches and management. He decked his office out with corny inspirational quotes all over the walls. He also endorsed an open-door policy where other players could come and talk to him whenever they please. Though it sounded positive in nature, it clearly indicated that Wilson viewed himself in a tier above the rest of his teammates. He also paraded around, appearing in several commercials, and made more than a regular amount of public appearances for interviews. But with all the public appearances and brand building, it's possible that Wilson wasn't quite as dedicated to actually playing football after signing his contract in Denver. He started out the season playing the worst football of his career, but in interviews he responded with cliché catchphrases and cheek-to-cheek smile. As the team kept losing, his robotically positive personality became a lot less endearing and a lot more frustrating for the Broncos fan base. Fans and media began questioning whether or not his personality was genuine or whether his entire persona was just manufactured to maintain a particular image. He continued to endorse himself in commercials and act like there were no internal issues, despite his and his team's abysmal play. Meanwhile, on the other side of things, the Seahawks surprised the country with their stellar performance and camaraderie without Wilson on the roster. Carroll raved about the team chemistry and the joy that his team was experiencing for their first time in years. Geno Smith, who'd never had success at the NFL level before, being named the starter in Seattle, enjoyed a career and made a much more positive impact than Wilson. Pete Carroll even took a slight jab at Wilson by mentioning Smith's willingness to wear a wristband with play calls on it, something Wilson was never able to do. Richard Sherman, who's now retired, has been publicly ridiculing Wilson every opportunity he's received. He's mentioned that the rest of the team never got along with him and that Wilson aligned himself more with management than he did with his teammates. Others have come forward and talked negatively about Wilson's unauthentic personality as well. ESPN analyst Kyle Brandt went as far as to say this last season about Russell Wilson: "I think Russell Wilson's one of the least authentic personalities we have in this league. I think Russell Wilson is a poser. And that doesn't mean he's a bad person. Actually, he's a good person. I think he tries to be something that he's not. And when you make the $245 million, you either got to be a really great guy with a locker room who loves you, or you got to be an amazing player." By the end of the season, the Broncos finished with a 5-12 record and recorded the least total points of any team in the entire league. Not exactly what you want to see out of an extraordinarily high-paid quarterback in the first season of an 8-year deal. But the team fired Nathaniel Hackett as their head coach and brought in Sean Payton as his replacement. Sean Payton was the Saints head coach for 15 seasons and led them to a Super Bowl in 2009. He also mentored Drew Brees into one of the all-time great quarterbacks. And when Payton walked into his new role, he wasn't mincing words with Wilson. He openly told Russell Wilson to stop focusing so much on his brand and to focus more on football. To directly quote Payton, he reportedly stated to Wilson, "Will you effing stop kissing all the babies? You're not running for public office." Since Payton's arrived, Wilson has lost his personal office space and has also shed weight, which hopefully improves his mobility this season. There will be no more special treatment, and Wilson will now be treated equally to the other 52 players on the roster. But look, before we keep piling additional hate onto Wilson, maybe all of this is exactly what he needed. We've all made mistakes in our lives, and at times have probably let our egos get inflated at some time. Could you imagine if you were a Super Bowl winning quarterback, married to a pop star like Ciara, getting paid hundreds of millions of dollars? Some of us would let that get to our heads too. He might be corny and he might have an inflated ego, but for the first time since his rookie season, Wilson will be facing plenty of doubters and should have extra reason to be motivated. We all know the talent's there. To see how Russell Wilson responds for the Broncos this season will be a major NFL storyline as he tries to rebuild his image and earn back some respect. What do you guys think? Will Wilson prove the haters wrong, or is he cooked like cornbread? Let us know in the comments section, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more sports insights.